Hello, everyone. I'm John Blumberg, the author of Return on Integrity. And the best advice I've ever received was I see so much potential inside of you, but not on the outside.
Ooh, so who said that, John? When did that touch your life? That's powerful stuff, man.
Yeah, it was when Sister Claire Marie pulled me out of the our seventh grade classroom, and actually with very loving eyes. I was terrified. She still wore a habit back then, and she really looked at me and she meant it. And I'll tell you, Phil, I still can picture standing there because it changed everything. I knew she was
Wow.
for me.
Wow. That's incredible, right? Having an early person believe in us before we even know what it means to believe in ourselves is super powerful. So like it changed everything. Like what changed for you, John? Was it your behaviors? I mean, in your book, right? We've got those four things and we'll probably go into those, but what do you think changed first?
I think the first thing was that she was seeing something actually that I wasn't seeing. And so she believed in me before I believed in myself. And in some ways, what I would say is I felt in that moment a bit of an accountability or a responsibility to live up to what she was seeing rather than what I preferred to do.
That's interesting, right? So if someone that we respect, someone that I guess we believe says that, it's very hard to go the other way. But I'll tell you though, sometimes just as interesting as someone who says just the contrary, right? Like, hey, you're never going to amount to anything. And then they overcome that too. So I think, we have to listen, but listen with real ears and think about that. Because one of the things that you mentioned in your book, and I really like this, you said perception is reality, but reality is not always the truth. So can you unpack that a little bit more for us, please? Because I think that fits in with what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I think certainly because always what people perceive their reality to be is coming from the context of where they see it. And the truth is the same for us. And that's certainly, I think, an issue for a lot of us right now. In fact, in my community of integrity that we have, we were just having a conversation about a week and a half ago, teasing apart this idea of honesty not necessarily being integrity, with the idea that our honesty is that we're just saying what we're seeing. And so that's so true. When somebody is giving you their perception of you, it's only from what they're seeing. And it may be very true. It may be very helpful. But as you name it so well, Phil, it could be actually the worst thing that could be coming at you. And I think probably through our life, we receive both of those.
Yeah, we sure do. We sure do. So you mentioned the integrity word, right? That's what you're known for, and that's what I want to really go deep on. But can you define integrity for us? Because I think it's important to have that baseline.
Yeah. So one of the things I start with, because I've tried to undefine what it is first, because I think if we were playing Family Feud right now and somebody said, what is the most common word that people relate to integrity? In other words, define integrity, the word would be honesty. And if it was the most common phrase, and we're still playing Family Feud, the phrase would be what you do when no one is watching. And what I suggest is that in fact, I've come pretty directly at this and said, actually, what you do when, or rather, that integrity is not defined by what you do when no one is watching. What you do when no one is watching is defined by your integrity. And it's just a flip of the words, but it changes everything. So 15 years ago, when I really got laser focused, and I always say, Phil, that integrity chose me as a topic. I didn't choose it.
Yeah.
But over the course of the 15 years, very early on, what really struck me was this idea that integrity is really defined by the words whole or entire or undiminished. In fact, if you think about that, it's integrated. In other words, it's really about connection. And so that is, I think, a much more healthy way to come at integrity, whereas we often think of it, well, a lot of times we think of it that it's like an object, like it's something I have, or this person has it, this person doesn't. Where I would say, if we're really thinking about integrity, it's much more about a state of being. And the truth is that all of us are in some degree of integrity every single day on every single issue and every single relationship and every single decision. And what's really neat about that is, if it's not an object that I have, now I'm done with it, I can pack it in. It's always calling to us, always inviting us into that space of being, which then causes it to always be an ongoing awareness that we have to have of it. You never arrive, you never get there. And I think if we're all honest with ourselves, we can all think of maybe even sometime this week where, yeah, no, that's true. I wasn't exactly in a state of integrity in that conversation or in that relationship. I wasn't coming to it as my best self.
Yeah. Wow. That's super, super interesting to think about it that way. And I think, right, like almost like a bicycle wheel, right? If it's a little bit off, if it's damaged, if it hit a pothole, right, and it's out of integrity, it still rolls, but maybe not as cleanly. Is that a good visual for that? Does that work?
Yeah, I think so. I think the good thing would be, at least with a wheel, you might begin to notice it faster sometimes than when we actually would begin to realize we're not in a state of integrity. Because I think the initial separation from that state of being is very subtle. And I do talk about that in the book with the concept of what I call drift, that we don't go running away from our values, that we go drifting away. And one day we wake up in a place that we never meant to be, drifting in a direction we never would have chosen. And that's something that really has resonated with a lot of people. I was just writing it when I wrote it. It should have resonated with me because of my own life journey, but I think it's why it resonates with so many people. The good thing about the tire is that once it gets a little wacky, a lot of times we kind of notice it fairly quickly, but not as much when we begin to drift.
Interesting. Yeah. The concept of drift, it was very fascinating to me. I read that, and to be clear, it certainly resonated as well, because yeah, we start out maybe a little angry, or we start out a little bit defensive, and then that leads us down a path. And eventually we get, 180 degrees from where we're trying to go, much like, an airplane. If we could course correct, well, we'd be a lot better. But sometimes, I know, at least I do, dig in my heels, get more upset, double down on my stupidity, and then end up making it even worse. And then I'm like, yeah, that's not really who I want to be. Not only not who I want to be, right? That's not who I am. And so how do we do a better job of, I guess, noticing when we're out of integrity so that we can feel it more like a bicycle tire than, holy crap, I'm 180 degrees wrong.
Yeah. Phil, you just named it there. This is not who I am. And I'm a bit of an optimist, but I truly believe that there is goodness inside everyone. The question is, have we dug to tap into that goodness? Have we dug to tap into the core? And so one of your best protections against drifting is to know your core to begin with. And I name it as your core values, but oftentimes I'm not sure we're even clear on what core values really are. We get them confused with behaviors, wants, needs, opinions, and beliefs. In fact, what I say, the question is it's not about what do I value? It's about what are my values? Two very different questions. But when you dig to your core, at least you have a place to anchor. I was speaking at the University of Alabama. This is years ago, is when I was first beginning to write the manuscript of Return on Integrity. And I'd been talking about this idea that most people actually don't know their core values. About 95%. It's shocking. I used to think 95% did. At least I was right on the percentage, except it was just the opposite. But this woman came up to me at the end of a keynote, and we had been talking about this drifting. And what she said was gold, Phil. She simply said, it really dawns on me, how would you know that you ever left if you didn't know where you were to begin with? And it sounds so simple, but that's exactly what you're talking about there. Is it's really not who I am. And if I don't connect to that and anchor to it on a regular basis, we don't know that we've left. And eventually what we find is we don't even see the shore anymore. So we've lost all relative perception of how far we really are drifting, because once you don't see the shore, you never have, any perspective anymore of what the drift is. And oftentimes when you're drifting out that far, nobody around you does either. And that can be a real challenge for us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think, I think when we end up lying to ourselves the most is when we, disavow, if you will, our value, right? Our values, and we say, no, I actually do value that. And then reality, I think that's when the doubling down comes in, right? When we, I guess, amplify those crappy decisions, those things that got us a little bit off course, and no, it really is over there. And then we really become out of integrity. Have you seen that too, John?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And think about this for a minute. And one of the things I talk about in the book is the dilemma. And the dilemma is what makes this so hard. And actually, when I was writing the book, I actually thought that the dilemma is the problem. In fact, in the leader version of the book, I really felt as I was writing it that if we could solve the dilemma, then integrity would be so much easier. One of the challenges when you write a book is you don't get it back, right? So you just write another one, so correct yourself. But what I would say is that the dilemma is a problem, the pressure that comes to bear, but it's also a gift. It's also the teachable moment. In fact, without the pressures, I don't think we'd ever really would understand dilemma. So in a world where we're striving and where we're really trying to do good things, and in fact, one of the most dangerous elements of the dilemma is when something really good has unintended consequences. And I think with what you're naming there is a lot of times we start to drift because we're trying to achieve something and we get so focused on that. That's true in corporations where there's so many metrics and measurements, and people begin to do anything to be able to be successful with what sometimes is actually unreasonable metrics and measurements. And so, but oftentimes it's the good things that can create the biggest dilemma. I mean, think about passion. Who would ever argue that passion is a bad thing until it starts to overheat? And when it does, what I always say is the core values are the thing that shuts down the thermostat when the passion begins to overheat and we start to drift, really trying to do what we think is the right thing to do. And it's precisely the wrong thing to do.
Wow. That's so tough, right? I mean, that is, I mean, I see why you call it the dilemma, right? Because that's so hard. I want good outcomes, but I don't want those bad consequences, right? If I achieve that, it's good. And you actually say, you quote a Fast Company article, like, when is enough? Enough. And that's such a hard question, right? Because we're always striving, right? I want more productivity and more money and more closed deals and more. When is enough? Like, how do we get at that, John? How do we get after that? Is that the heart of our integrity here?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the idea that if we dig to what our core values are, and again, I really want to distinguish between what we value, because if we start with that question, we end up with a lot more needs and wants and behaviors and opinions and beliefs. What I'm talking about really are what are the values at your core. And when you're clear about that, oftentimes what they will do is release your grip on attachments, or it will release your grip on the need for more. And certainly in our culture, oftentimes, and I think that's why in that 1990, late 90s Fast Company article, when things were blowing and going, this was right on the arc of the beginning of the dot-com era. And I think in the society where more is always better, it becomes an addiction. And if you don't really anchor into something that gives you clarity, of course, more leads to more leads to more. And I think we can all think of examples where that has been the case for us, where really when we're grounded in our core, we really do begin to see those examples where less is more. and we get very clear about protecting ourselves from, it's not bad to have more, but it's a question of what is the more, and then really defining when is enough to protect us from where we've crossed the line now of just becoming addicted to that. And we can become addicted to, anything. And the worst things to become addicted to are the good things, because everything has a shadow side.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. You say that, right? And then you talk about silence in the book, and we'll get there. But, I just want to share this. So I printed this out today, right there, your handout here at the Big Dig, which I think is great, right? Diving in all the core values here, because I think sometimes folks, they honestly, John, I'm guilty sometimes, right? I don't even know what that value is anymore. So let's just hit a couple, just give a few words maybe so people understand in really concrete terms, like what is a core value that you're talking about here?
Yeah, so I say it's a state of being, and what I would say there in that list, by the way, Phil, is curated when I give people a blank sheet of paper. I really went out and tried to figure out a sophisticated tool to determine if somebody knew their core values, and only came full circle back to a blank sheet of paper. There's nothing more telling than that, right? And so over a course of 2 years in audiences of professionals, I asked them that question. Now, on that list, because this is what we first come to, most often people are going to name behaviors, wants, and needs, and not core values. But let me give an example. I tend to hesitate, because here's what people want, is they want a list of the 30 most profound core values I've ever heard of from people. And let me pick my favorite 5. Well, of course, we want to make this comfortable, not transformational, right? But if we were to name an example, and I like this one because I think it really has 2 good words. And I see on a lot of people's list the word listening, that listening is a core value. It's not. Listening is a behavior. I may value listening, or I may value when others listen, but listening is a behavior. It's an action. It happens in a given moment. A core value is it's a state of being. It's trajectory that when you do it on a regular basis, it literally transforms who you are. So let's take listening as the behavior. What I would suggest a core value would be is respect. And so what I mean by that, I remember back in my years at Arthur Andersen, when I was there, I went through a course called effective listening. It was an 8-hour course, and I couldn't imagine what they were going to talk about for 8 hours, but I was terrified not to listen, because I thought the instructor was going to say, okay, what did I just say? Right. And I would have no idea. So I listened so hard during that course, and I was exhausted, which told me I'm a pitiful listener, because I've never been that exhausted after a course. Right. But here's the deal. In that course, which is taught by a lot of salespeople as well, they were teaching you how to listen. And they talked about all kinds of things like mirroring and pacing. And so if somebody goes in that course, they could think, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I can take this and manipulate people. Or that's the behavior, right? The behavior is listening. Or they can be grounded with a sense of respect and think, oh my goodness, look at all these tools I have that allow my respect to be expressed. And so the person that has a different core can take the same behavior and use them in completely different ways. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. That's so interesting, because absolutely right. I call it check the box training, right? I've got 8 tactics that I just learned, and now, yay, I'm done. And it's like, well, hold on, back up. What really matters, right? What's the most important thing? What's the core value behind that? And if the core value is service, well, you're going to be very different than if the core value is achievement, let's say, right? So that is where I see the biggest disconnect. The same tools, the same tactics, the same behaviors, as you call them, right? Because the want is different, which makes the need different, which makes the value different in a lot of cases. And that cascades up. And I find it interesting, though, that you always lead with core value instead of behavior. So why is that, John? Can't we just change the way that we behave?
Yeah, so that's what we think. And what I would suggest is we have spent billions of dollars in this country, in corporate America, trying to change behavior. And I get it, because it's the quick fix. If we can just get people to behave, then it would all work. And so what we do is behavioral modification. If you want to put this in the spiritual world, I call it, we show up and there's sin management. If we can just get the veneer looking right. So what do people do? They show up at a very shallow veneer level, and that's what we work on, and we put all of our energy into that. Now let's be clear that our behaviors, our wants, and our needs are all important. They're all really important, but the question is, where does the motives and the flow begin? And what I see is, the reality is, it's going from behaviors to wants to needs to values. And I've never said that people didn't have core values. I just said 95% of the people don't know what they are. But if that flow is going the opposite direction, so we're really looking at behaviors, then what happens is everything gets defined by the behaviors, the wants, and the needs, and the core values get defined for us. And so I totally understand it, and I totally understand our investment in it. But what I would suggest is we need to reverse the flow. And then when we do, our values begin to define our needs and our wants and our core values. And, one of the really tricky areas, Phil, is the needs, because this is so gripping to us. This is where our opinions and beliefs fall, that we tend to repel people with them because they're so grounded and they feel so important and we value them so much. But if it's not flowing from the core into that, then it can become destructive. If it's flowing from the core into that, then they can become really helpful. So what I would suggest is behaviors are really, really important. That's how we see our core values manifest themselves. The question is it shallow only based on the behavior, or is it really grounded at the core, and those behaviors are simply an expression of the core? And that's the big difference. But you're right, we really do focus on behaviors, and I totally get it, because that's what people see, and our ego wants people to believe what they see. But it may not necessarily, as going back to your very first question, it may not be reality, and we may not see it either if we don't ground to the core.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? I mean, to your point, now, like, it's really clear to me, if we don't define our core, we get defined by our behavior, right? Like, if because it just happens. I mean, if we just behave, we end up with wants, we get needs, and now it's more. And I don't think anybody would say my core value is greediness. But if all you're doing is striving, right, you're greedy. You're just, you're behaving that way, which defines your wants and your needs. And you might not see it, to your point, right? 95% of us don't, not because I think we want to, right? We want to believe we're acting in integrity, but I think we just don't see that. So how do we, how do we pay better attention, John? How do we make sure that, every day that we can say, okay, today or this hour or this minute, how do I know that I'm behaving in my integrity and in alignment?
Yeah. So this is where the work comes, is that, again, it goes back to defining what these core values are. And this isn't a go to the mountaintop, come back down 3 days later, and now I've got my core. Now, we would love that, right? What this is it's a wrestling match. And it's frustrating. And when you start to work on it, you wish you never had heard about it. It's just the way it is. I mean, people think this integrity thing is all purity and it's all morality. No, this is a frickin' wrestling match. And it takes honesty, ironically, to say, you know what, I don't have this figured out and I'm a mess. And you know what's beautiful about that is when you really have your own wrestling match, it takes a lot of self-grace. I mean, it really does. It really takes some grace upon yourself. What's beautiful about that is when you've done this yourself, you give a lot of other people a lot more grace. And the thing is that this takes time and you need to work on it a little bit. That list that you have there, it's on my website for anybody to download, or you could put it in the show notes. It is, it's really designed, and there's 750 different words. I've never judged it. What that means is anybody that turned a word in, I never said, oh, I'm not going to put that on the list, right? So you may be surprised by some of the things on the list. That's not my job to judge it, nor did I prioritize it. You can see it's in alphabetical order. My hope was with about 750 ideas, nobody would go pick their favorite 3 or 4. By the way, there are a few values on there, but most of them are needs, wants, and behaviors. And so what I would say is it's literally designed to trigger your thinking, really to start the digging process. But you work on it a while and you think, I'm tired of thinking about it. Put it away, go back to life, work on it a while. And I'd say over about 30 days, you'll get to a version 1.0. And then just like if you're buying a new car, start to test drive the thing and see how it works. But it's probably about a year before you actually begin to come into, you know what, I think this actually these are really starting to resonate with me. So it takes a lot of patience and persistence to get there, but the fruit of the labor is amazing once you get there, because you keep going back to it. Then every single day you go back to it and you have something to anchor to.
Wow. You just gave me a year's worth of work, John. That's not how this is supposed to work, man. I'm looking for one easy check, right? Let's do this.
I know. This is why I say integrity chose me, not vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's so funny. Yeah. Well, one of my favorite quotes that you say, and I think we'll take us out with this and expand on this and offer some, I guess one last bit of smartness here is, rather than look to the past or the future, it's far more helpful to stay in the present and dig for the truth. You say that in the book, and I have to tell you, when I read that first, of course, it was like, oh man, like I know, I mean, like I know that's true. I know that's true, but it's so stinking hard. So take us out with, maybe how we can get started on this really hard journey. I mean, folks, I'm telling you right now, the book is amazing. It rocked my socks off. Like I read the books that I have my guests on, and this one I was like, okay, like every challenge, I'm like, oh, yeah, that one like hit me. Like, oh my gosh, like a lot of your chapters, I have a lot circled, and like I got to refer back to that one. I got to go deeper. So take us out with how we can at least get started on this journey, please, John.
Yeah, Phil, one thing I'd say is it isn't about the past and it isn't about the future. The past is, they're good data points. The future is aspirational. Often those aspirations are what other people think that we should be doing. The truth is that's what we're looking for. In the present moment, digging for the truth. And it's a digging process, and it takes patience and persistence. What I would suggest is it also takes silence. And we are terrified of silence for the most part. I believe that's why you're beginning to see so many people do guided meditations and sit in silence. This is not a new thing. This is a very historic thing. But when we do, we begin to go deeper and deeper into our core. And what we find is amazing. I say it's like taking a dig into a 100-foot water well. And what I would suggest is the water is there whether you dig it or not. But if you're willing to do the work, when you get to the water, it will do amazing things for you. And it certainly will help you live with this beautiful thing called integrity.
Wow. Silence. It's a beautiful thing. It's a hard thing for sure. John, wow. That's all I can really say here. Folks, if you're like wowed like I am and you're thinking, I want to get started, I encourage you get John's books, right? Get Return on Integrity. Go to BlumbergROI.com. Connect with him on LinkedIn. Read his stuff because, the water's there. If you let it transform you, it will. And if you don't, it's going to be a really tough time. So John, wow, man. Thanks so much for sharing so much about integrity with me and everybody listening. This is super helpful for me. And I know everyone listening will say, wow, this is great stuff. So thank you.
Great to be with you, Phil. Thank you.